Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Lions Grid. Here today is, of course, as we've been here the last few days, Kevin Marheine and my co-host Joe Wilmot. Joe, how you doing today?
Doing good.
Good to have you back. The purpose of today's episode, we're going to take a look at which Detroit Lions are worth having on your fantasy football team here in 2019. Fantasy football, of course, is one of the great things that accompanies football. I know I've been in a league pretty much every year for since like high school. Joe, I know you're also an avid fantasy football player. You looking forward to this season?
I am. Mostly because I sat out last year. I didn't play fantasy football. And what happened is I used to play these prize leagues for the NFL fantasy football where you can win a coin, a jersey, or a football that's signed. And that was a lot of fun because it was like a $10, $30, or $50 entry fee. And everybody's playing for this, big prize at the end. So it made it really fun. I tried to sign up for another one this year, but they are not having the same type of setup on NFL.com. But I'm getting back into fantasy this year. I am doing one through NFL, and I joined your fantasy football league. So I'm looking to have two teams going on. One for bragging rights and one for a free team off of NFL.com. So I'm being sure to do my studying in Madden and seeing who the best players are ranked overall wise right now and who's going to have a good season and see what's going on. But as we get into the episode, we're going to see some projected ranks.
Yeah, most certainly, and yeah, glad to have you joining the Gridiron, which is the name of the fantasy football league. There's definitely a lot of my family in it. It's also got a lot of friends, so it's been going on now for quite a few seasons. I want to say dating back to the early 2000s. So one of the newer additions that we've been playing for the last couple of years is a trophy that's kind of a replica Lombardi trophy. And what we do is each year, whoever wins it, they get to take home the trophy for the year. But we also add a plaque with to the base of it with their the manager's name, the team name, the year, all that good stuff, so that it's kind of almost like a mini Stanley Cup in the fact that it gets sort of carried on. You get to see who the past winners are, and then of course it can look nice on your mantle, so you get bragging rights plus a nice little trophy to show that you are the best fantasy football owner in our
The
league.
goals to get the name on there a lot of times.
And so far, we've only had one person ever win the trophy twice. Our winner last year, Jake Cochran, he was actually the first person to go ahead and hoist the trophy. Well, the trophy didn't exist the first time he won, so this was actually his first time hoisting the trophy, but it was his second victory. So he's our first two-time champion. He's going to try and be our first champion to win back-to-back titles.
I don't know about that.
I definitely want to rain on that parade. I don't want that to happen. So, yeah, looking forward to this year of fantasy football. And of course, if you're going to try and project this year's fantasy rankings, you got to take a look back at last year. So let's go ahead and throw up some numbers here from 2018. You can see on your screen now we have a review of the 2018 season for the Lions. Of course, the Lions finished 6-10, which was the 22nd best record in the NFL. They averaged 20.3 points per game, which was 25th in the league. They averaged 327.3 yards, 24th in the league. You look at the passing and rushing breakout there. Passing yards per game, you're looking at 223.5, 20th in the league, and rush yards. Even though it's only the 23rd best rushing per game, it's over 100 yards, 103.8. I will take that from the Lions. And of course, rounding it out there, you have your passing attempts per game and your rushing attempts per game, which, despite being in the 20s for all the other categories, you can see they were 11th in the passing attempts per game and 18th in the rushing attempts per game. So they were definitely throwing the ball a lot, running the ball a lot. They just weren't getting a whole lot of yards per carry or per passing attempt. So, A lot of 20s on the board there. Obviously, having a 6-10 season sort of can reflect that. You know, if you're 20th in a lot of those categories, you're probably not going to have the greatest record, and that was definitely the case for the Lions last year. You know, Joe, we've talked about it the last couple episodes. 2018, a rough season for the Lions. Obviously, the new head coach, offensive coordinator, not head coach, Darrell Bevell's coming in. I believe in 8 of his last 12 seasons where he's been the offensive coordinator of the team, that team has been in the top 10 in rush percentages. So they're probably going to be running the ball quite a bit, the Lions, this upcoming season in a Darrell Bevell offense. And I think you'll see that reflected in some of the ranking projections here, but could be a pretty, obviously there's optimism heading into the 2019 season, getting Jim Bob Cooter out of there and bringing in a new offensive coordinator to hopefully spark the offense. So let's go ahead and run through some of the players that you may consider for your fantasy football team. Taking a look here at that QB position, the guy touching the ball most of the offensive downs, you do have Mr. Matthew Stafford. You can see there at the top that 19, he was ranked the 19th quarterback in the league in fantasy football. This is based off of Pro Fantasy Football's numbers that they had there for the 2018 season, weeks 1 through 17. You can see that for the season in your typical PPR league, he scored 212 points, just about, in 16 games, averaging about 13.3 points per game. So taking a look here at the 2019 season, ESPN's Matthew Berry projects Stafford to be the 24th ranked QB in this upcoming season. And Joe, 24 is definitely in the bottom half of the league. Would you consider taking Stafford as your quarterback for the upcoming fantasy season?
One thing about him is that he's always playing in every game, and that's what I look for with players, is that if they can stay healthy, stay injury free, and not be injury prone, and play in every game, that's definitely a plus to have on your team. I don't see him going down from last year. They have him at 19 from last year and down to 24 this year. I don't see him on the decline this year. I think it's going to be on the rise. I think another year in the NFL, he's only going to become wiser. I don't think aging is really something that happens with quarterbacks as far as, decline. You see it with running backs. You see it with wide receivers. You see it with players all across the board. But as you age in the NFL as a quarterback, if you're in, the league at 31 as a quarterback, something has maintained your longevity, especially as a starter franchise quarterback. I really do think that Stafford's going to have a better year than 24th ranked, better year than 19th ranked. But if I do end up taking him, it's going to be a very late round pick and as a backup quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's just it. I would definitely consider him for the backup spot, and there are a lot of upsides to him, like you mentioned. He is very, very durable, doesn't miss a whole lot of games, although last season you could argue that was to his own detriment, not sitting out with that back injury. But definitely a guy that you can count on. The Lions do like to throw the ball. Wasn't very successful doing that last season, but new offensive coordinator. I definitely don't think many people are going to be going after him as their QB1, but I think a solid, potentially low risk, potential high reward QB in Stafford, because I don't think you're going to face a whole lot of competition on draft day when it comes to selecting Stafford. Moving on to the wide receiver position, and we'll cover all three here real quickly, and then we'll sort of talk about the whole group. Obviously, the first of the three receivers we'll be talking about here is Kenny Golladay. Last season was the 21st ranked wide receiver, scored about 207 points in 15 games, averaging just under 14 points per game. Matthew Berry has him ranked as the 19th, or projecting him as the 19th best receiver for fantasy football in the upcoming season. You take a look at Marvin Jones Jr. Obviously, he only played in 9 games last season, so that hurt his overall there. You can see he finished as the 56th ranked receiver in fantasy football. So if he can stay healthy this season, you can see there Matthew Berry's projecting him have a big upswing there up to 37th. And then taking a look at Danny Amendola, obviously was not with the Lions last season, played with Miami, was 74th last season. Matthew Berry doesn't have him projected in his top 90 wide receivers. But I do know I was, obviously keeping an eye on different reports out of training camp and whatnot. And there have been a lot of conversations about Danny Amendola and about people struggling to cover him. So even though he's not projected very high, again, I think he might be a guy that you could get for pretty much nothing later in the rounds, and it might be a solid pickup if you're looking for a sort of a flex position type player. And obviously Kenny Galladay, I think out of the three wide receivers, is the one that's he's sort of the A-list guy. He's the guy that I think people, if you're going to be fighting for a Detroit Lions wide receiver, he's going to be the guy a lot of people are targeting, especially in the semi-early rounds. Joe, what are your thoughts there about that receiving core? Anybody catch your eye?
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to project Galladay and Jones have better seasons this year, and then they're going to project, a bad rating for Amendola. But I think Amendola is going to do much better than, the 90th best wide receiver in fantasy football. I think he's going to do way better than that. So, I don't understand how Stafford's projection is down 5 points or 5 ratings if you got the wide receivers on the rise, and underestimate a wide receiver for Danny Amendola. I just don't understand Stafford's rating so low. But, I do think the wide receivers are going to have a good season. If I had to choose one, it'd be a tough one to choose between Galladay and Marvin Jones, but I'd have to go with Galladay simply because he's younger, he's bigger, he can break tackles, he can go up for that jump ball in the end zone, he can rack up the yards. He was talking this season about how he could be a 100-catch guy. A lot of upside for drafting Kenny Galladay, but with number 1 or number 2 pick, if you can get him with the third wide receiver position, that's a steal. But number 2, it could be a solid starting year for number 2 wide receiver. But really, if you can get him at number 3, that's the steal. So watch out for Kenny Galladay. Marvin Jones, if he can stay healthy, he can be a deep threat. He can be good. I do think the offense is going to be vastly improved. But I don't think Amendola is going to be as bad as they ranked him.
Yeah, I definitely think that he could be a sort of a sleeper because, again, I don't think you're going to have a lot of competition when it comes to drafting. I think Darrell Bevel will try and play call to utilize that slot position. Obviously, you can see we'll take a look at the tight end spots, but, I think the Lions have invested in making sure that Stafford has some outlets that aren't, not necessarily the deep threats, some guys that are going to get into the middle of the field, into some of those spaces to get the ball to. So I think, obviously, especially in a PPR league, there's, I think, a chance that you might be able to take advantage of some limited competition for Amendola and some potentially some high reward. Moving on to the running back position here, we'll go ahead and take a look at the 2 big names in the backfield this season. We have here Mr. Kerryon Johnson. He finished last season as the 33rd ranked running back. You can see 107 points per game in 10 games of action with over just nearly 11 points per game. Matthew Berry has him projected this season to be the 15th ranked running back. And then taking a look here at C.J. Anderson, finished the season at 57th. Matthew Berry's projecting him to be the 58th overall running back in this upcoming fantasy football season. So obviously with both C.J. Anderson and Kerryon Johnson, they didn't get a full 16-game complement. You can see, Kerryon Johnson was 10 games. C.J. Anderson only played in 9 games and still were able to run the ball rather well. My only concern with Kerryon Johnson, you can see, or if you remember back, Matthew Berry had him ranked there as the 15th, or projecting him as the 15th best running back. I don't know if the Lions are committed yet to making him sort of the featured back. Obviously, bringing in C.J. Anderson, I don't think is a bad thing. But I think, with C.J. Anderson, The rookie out of Maryland they drafted, Ty Johnson, I want to say is his last name. And then, of course, they still have Zach Zenner. I think they're going to be taking a running back by committee approach. I believe that Kerryon Johnson will get he'll get the lion's share of those carries, but I still think they're going to be trying to work in the other backs. So, I definitely would feel better about him because I think, I'm optimistic about Kerryon Johnson. I think he's one of the best players the Lions have drafted in quite some time and could end up being that featured running back. But I'm just concerned that this season, if from a fantasy perspective, that he might be splitting some carries early on, particularly with the rest of the cast there that they have. Although they did get rid of Theo Riddick, which I think helps because if he was still there, if you're carrying all five of them, I think it's definitely a running back by committee thing. But what are your thoughts there at the running back position, Joe?
Yeah, I'm not going to draft C.J. Anderson and Kerryon Johnson. You always got to question the injury bug. Is he going to stay healthy? They were talking on 97 won the ticket about, him being a first and second down guy, maybe giving C.J. Anderson the third down, the goal line. But I'd like to see Kerryon Johnson become an all-down purpose back and, be the power back, be the third down back. Maybe not the third down receiving back or the third down draw back, like the setting up the draw. The running back draw. But I'd like to see him be, the feature back and get most of the carries. If he can do that, he'd be worth a second running back position. But if he's going to be more of a running back by committee, you might want to look for him in the later rounds as a backup running back.
Yeah, I think a lot's going to depend on when you can get him in your fantasy draft. I think, I think he would be worth reaching for in the earlier rounds if, again, you were 100% sure he was going to be that featured back because I do think he has the talent. But I think it's the same kind of fear that you had last year if you were a fantasy football owner where Kerryon Johnson would do the work getting the ball down the field and then in short yardage situations down there by the goal line, instead of it being LeGarrette Blount potentially vulturing his touchdowns, you now have to worry about C.J. Anderson getting the call to potentially come in there and steal some of those precious fantasy points away from you. Obviously, when it comes to fantasy football, it's a little bit different than just cheering for a game normally. I think you get a little greedier. Even when it comes to the teams you're the fans of, you want them to win, but you want them to win in a way that benefits your fantasy football team. So if you're sitting there with Kerryon Johnson and they go ahead and switch C.J. Anderson in, you might be a little less happy if he runs that ball across the goal line instead of Kerryon. Taking a look. Go ahead, Joe.
I was just gonna say I'm gonna have to agree. That's something you got to watch out for always is the goal line situation and who's getting the ball when you're that close to the goal line.
Yeah, it can be a little bit of a points drag there from you, and that could hurt. Taking a look now at the tight ends, we have Jesse James, obviously one of the big names coming in free agency. He was the 21st ranked tight end last season. Matthew Berry's projecting him to be 28th. And as we take a look here at TJ Hawkinson, the first round pick out of Iowa, obviously no 2018 stats to take a look at, but Matthew Berry is projecting him to be 26th. So 2 spots ahead of Jesse James by the end of the season at that tight end spot. Jesse James had some decent games. He wasn't like consistently putting up fantasy football points last year. I think he's definitely somebody who, he's sort of a feast or famine tight end. So if you have him on your team, again, I don't think you're going to be reaching in the early rounds for a Jesse James. But if you're I know myself, if I'm not getting one of like the top tight ends, like if I'm not getting Gronk or Kelsey or, somebody who's going to be scoring points on the regular basis, I typically let the tight end position fall by the wayside. So then I usually end up with somebody like Jesse James where I'm just trying to get somebody in there who's going to score points. Again, I think consistency is going to be the big thing from him from a fantasy football perspective. I think obviously the things he does blocking and all that, I think it'll definitely help out the team there. But from a fantasy point of view, he's not really all that consistent. He is a great person, I think, though, for T.J. Hawkinson to have as sort of a mentor, and hopefully we'll see him, Daryl Bevell, make T.J. Hawkinson a weapon inside of this offense. Obviously, we know he's good at blocking, but I'm hoping they're going to make him, a featured presence in the offense as well.
Yeah, and it's always fun to draft a Lion because then on game day when you're watching the game and your Lion that you have on your fantasy team scores a touchdown, it makes it that much more exciting. It also makes it more stressful if you have Kerryon Johnson and they hand it off to C.J. Anderson for the touchdown. You're like, yeah, they got the touchdown, but it's not to the guy that gets me points, but it gets your team points, so it works both ways. That's one thing with me. I always do the catch-22 because if sometimes I bet against my team just to earn money if they lose, just to make the loss of my hometown team a little bit less painful. I did that in the 2009 Stanley Cup against the Pittsburgh Penguins in Game 7. I bet on the Pittsburgh Penguins to win that game, and I won $20 because one of my friends was like, oh, no, the Red Wings got that game. The Red Wings got that game. And to me, it's like, yeah, I'll be happy to pay out $20 if the Red Wings can win back-to-back championships. I don't care. But if they don't, I got $20. I mean, it's all right. You can't really judge, who's going to win the game, and then be like, I'm going to bet on the Wings. Not only do they lose, you lose $20.
Yeah, it softens the blow a little bit for you. So I've used that tactic as well when it comes to some things. So it definitely it can take a bad situation and make it just a little bit better. So then the last two spots we have to look at here, we'll throw it up here. You got Matt Prater. He was the 9th ranked kicker last year in fantasy football, projecting to be the 14th ranked according to Matthew Berry this season. Taking a look at the defense and special teams side of things, if you want to go with the Lions, they were tied for 17th. Matthew Berry isn't putting them in his top 20. He only released his top 20 defenses for fantasy football. So, out of the two of those, clearly, Matt Prater is the one who performed better last year and also is projected to perform better this year. I definitely don't mind if I get Prater in the fantasy football draft. I think he's a pretty solid kicker, and is definitely somebody you can count on, very reliable. From a defensive standpoint, Joe, we've been talking about it this week with the various episodes, but there's a lot to be excited about with the Detroit Lions defense. There's some questions, I think, specifically around, who's going to be that second safety who steps up, what is going to happen with the linebacker core, which is definitely, I think, if you look at the defense, that linebacker trio there is definitely the weak spot currently, but there's a lot of talent on that defensive line. Obviously, we've brought in a couple guys to try and help out Darius Slay in the secondary in terms of cornerbacks. Would you are you going to be taking the Lions defense? Are you somebody who carries two defenses, or are you the type of guy that when your bye week comes up, you just go and pick up whoever the best defense on the open market?
No, I usually carry two defenses. I carry a backup of everyone except the kicker. But I think that if I can get Detroit's defense as a backup, I think that's a win for me because they're going to do better than 20th ranked. I mean, they have good defensive line. Linebackers, I expect a better year out of them, knowing the system a little bit more, knowing Patricia a little bit more. I think the defense is going to be better than it was last year. So I don't know how. I mean, I guess just being a fan, I think the team's going to be way better than what everybody's projecting them to be this year.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of interesting. We've already looked at it from a Madden perspective. We've looked at, where Vegas is putting their win-losses. We've looked at, what some other people are thinking in terms of what their record's going to be. And now we're looking at the fantasy football rankings. And definitely it seems like there's a projection there that the Lions aren't going to have a very good season. And I think they definitely have an opportunity to surprise people. Obviously, you got to go out and play the games. To do that, like we mentioned yesterday, the biggest challenges for them are going to be those divisional games. You look at the NFC North. Yeah, there are question marks, and a lot of it is around some of the QB play. Is Mitchell Trubisky going to step up for the Bears? Is Kirk Cousins going to prove that he's worth the contract that they paid for him? There's definitely question marks, but you look at the rosters, there is a lot of talent on these NFC North teams. So really, that's going to be where the Lions need to come out and play well, is against those NFC North opponents. And then, as we were looking at the 2019 schedule during our review yesterday, there's definitely some opportunities for the Lions to take advantage of what isn't an overly difficult schedule. So I'm, again, people are definitely down on them. We've looked at it from a Madden perspective, a fantasy football perspective, taking a look at Vegas's odds and just where people are projecting them to finish the season. So people definitely are counting on them being a bottom team in the league, and I don't think they're necessarily as sold. Like, they're not the New York Giants. Like, there's no doubt in my mind the New York Giants are going to have an awful season this year. They had a bad offseason, and they really haven't improved. It's just going to be bad. The Lions, I think, definitely added in some components that I think are really nice. Trey Flowers, Mike Daniels, some of the secondary stuff, and then on the offensive side, T.J. Hawkinson, I think he definitely has a chance to be good. Bringing in the new offensive coordinator, Darrell Bevell. Lots to be excited about. Definitely some uncertainty because, when you're adding in all those new elements, adding all those new things into the recipe, you're not necessarily sure what you're going to get as you're baking it all together. But I think there's certainly a chance for the Lions to come out here and surprise in 2019.
Yeah, you got to look at how the league thinks they're going to do, and sometimes you see that by how many primetime games the team get. And this year they only have the Thanksgiving game and the game against Green Bay.
Yep.
At home, that are primetime games, that are going to be showed, to the nation. So it's like, you got to perform not only well throughout the season, but you got to perform well in those games to be more popular in the NFL for people to want to watch you. I remember there was a game that we played in London. Everybody in London was like, oh, the Lions are great, because they see us play a team and beat up on them and win the game in London, in the last seconds. Then the next year we go in there and we get absolutely smoked. And then everybody in London's just like, okay, well, I bought all this Lions gear. I don't know, if they're as good as a team as I thought they were, because they're kind of not really tuned into the NFL over there most times.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said about that. I think there was a little bit of excitement for the Lions at the beginning of the 2018 season. They just brought in Matt Patricia, who a lot of people thought was and is one of the best young defensive minds in the league. There was certainly some healthy optimism heading into the 2018 season, and I think it was a surprise that they did end up with that horrible 6-10 record and that the season went as poorly as it did. I think it did come as a surprise to a lot of people, which I'm sure has contributed to the way they're being projected here in 2019. I can see there. My dad did bring up a good point. One of the things that is going to be real key to the success of the Lions is going to be that offensive line. We've touched on that before too with TJ
Lang.
TJ Lang, thank you. I was thinking Hawkinson was stuck in my mind. TJ Lang retiring. Obviously, Kenny Wiggins in the first depth chart here is the guy that's slated to be having that started spot. So we'll have to see how that goes. There's some question marks there, but overall, I think I don't see why there isn't a reason to be optimistic as a Lions fan, because I've known Lions fans my whole life living in Michigan. I haven't had to suffer as badly as them being a Packers fan, but they've always been optimistic. Like, even after the season's coming off like the 0-16 season and then the 1-15 season after that, people were still willing to tell me, oh, the Lions are going to be so much better. You know, Lions fans are perpetually optimistic, and if they could be optimistic back then, I think things are much better now than in the darkest moment. So I think there's, if you could be optimistic when the team was in a much worse spot, I don't see why you can't be cautiously optimistic this season that they can
I
get
don't
things
think I
turned
can
around.
be as optimistic as I am this year if they don't have a good year next year. You know what I'm saying? Like, if they don't perform well this year and get a winning record or make the playoffs, I don't think I can be as optimistic about them next year as I am this year.
That's true. That'll be 2 seasons in a row where they sort of let you down. So maybe if there's sweeping changes in the organization, then you might feel a little bit better. But if it's the same cast of guys coming back and they've let you down twice in a row, I agree with you. It's hard to feel optimistic heading into a season. It's like we're gonna just see the same thing again. So, all right, that will do it for today's episode. Obviously, when it comes to fantasy football, your QB, your wide receiver, your running back, your tight ends, your kicker, and your defense is really all there is to take a look at. So, although this episode did end up being a little bit longer than I anticipated, I thought it was going to be a rather quick one, but still had lots of good conversation around which Lions are worth keeping an eye on as you're doing your fantasy football draft here for the 2019 season. As always, just want to thank everybody who watches the videos, everybody who likes it, shares it, and everybody who's hit subscribe. Again, we have a goal to reach 100 subscribers. The reason for that is we'll get our nice custom URL. So instead of being YouTube/random letters and numbers, we can be YouTube/the Lions Grid. That's the goal. That's what we're working towards. So if you did like the show, please do help the channel grow. Go ahead, again, like, subscribe, and you can also ring that little bell that'll be there by the subscribe button. If you go ahead and actually it's on this side. If you go ahead and hit that little bell, you'll get a notification when we're going live with these live streams and when all the videos and stuff is going up. So. We will be back again tomorrow, and then also on Thursday, which is the first preseason game. Tomorrow we'll take a look, as I mentioned, the first depth chart for the Lions came out, so we'll talk a little bit about that and preview some of the position battles to keep an eye on here in the preseason as the roster tries to become solidified for what will be a exciting 2019 season. Anything you want to say before we sign off for today, Joe?
It's always fun to have Lions in your lineup, especially when they do well on game.
It gives you just a little bit extra to be happy about in the game. So I know definitely paying attention to fantasy football for me has only increased my interest in the NFL and things like that, because you're playing for a little something extra, so it gets you that much more involved. But that will do it for us today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kevin Marheine. He's Joe Wilmot. That side. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you during the next episode. Bye-bye.